He thought he could do anything. A tourist crossed the line, literally and figuratively, mocking the Queen's Guard, throwing money at his feet, and disrespecting centuries of tradition. But when his hand reached for the royal horse, everything changed. The shocking moment left the crowd speechless, and what happened next became a lesson no one would forget. Let's start from the beginning. London, the city of timeless grandeur and chaotic modernity, buzzed as usual. Red double-decker buses crawled through narrow streets. Big Ben rang its iconic chimes, and tourists flooded the landmarks with selfie sticks held high like ceremonial spears. Near the gates of Buckingham Palace stood James Ellington, as steadfast as the traditions he represented. Tall, impeccably dressed in the ceremonial uniform of the Queen's Guard, James was the picture of discipline and honor. His bearskin hat sat firmly atop his head, his grip on the reins unwavering, and his demeanor stoic. James loved his role, not for the pageantry or the uniform, but because it allowed him to be a living symbol of Britain's heritage. This wasn't just a job, it was a duty, a testament to history. The day had begun like any other. Already James had endured 10 rounds of the classic Make the Guard Laugh challenge, 3 failed attempts by teenagers to touch his hat, and a gaggle of schoolchildren shouting, "Hey, soldier boy!" None of it fazed him. He was a rock, but that was before he arrived. The tourist. Dressed in khaki shorts, a loud "I Love London" t-shirt, and sneakers that had likely traveled more than James ever would, he stormed into the scene. He was the kind of man whose voice could outmatch the cacophony of a city block. With a smartphone poised like a weapon, he set his sights on James. "Hey buddy, smile," he bellowed, his accent unmistakably American, loud enough to rival a megaphone. James didn't move. His face was a stone-carved masterpiece of indifference. Even the horse, a stoic partner in duty, remained still, but the tourist wasn't about to be ignored. Confidence radiated off him like heat from asphalt on a summer's day. He stepped closer, his shoes skimming the edge of the sacred white line that separated the guards from the public. "What's the deal? Are you a statue? A robot? Come on, let's make you famous." With a dramatic flourish, he pulled out a wad of cash and threw it at James's feet like confetti. The crowd gasped. Phones went up, recording the spectacle. Some chuckled nervously while others murmured, "That's too far." The atmosphere thickened with tension, like a storm about to break. James, of course, didn't flinch. Not outwardly, at least. Inside, though, a spark of irritation flickered. Years of discipline told him to stay calm, but this man's arrogance, his sheer disregard for the dignity of the moment, gnawed at him. The tourist wasn't done. He stepped over the white line, physically breaching the invisible barrier of respect. It wasn't enough to throw money or shout taunts. Now, he turned his attention to James's horse, leaning in as if it were a plush pony on a carousel. "Hey there, big guy. I've always wanted to feed a royal horse," he exclaimed, reaching out to touch its nose. The horse snorted, its patience thinning. Even the best-trained animals had limits. James shifted just slightly, a barely noticeable movement, but enough to signal that he was fully aware of the man's antics. This wasn't just a tourist. This was a provocateur. The crowd buzzed, some laughed, others shook their heads in disapproval, but the tourist basked in the attention, oblivious to the line he had crossed, not just on the ground, but in decency. He thought he was the star of the show, unaware that his performance was about to take a dramatic turn. The tourist had done it. One foot crossed the pristine white line, and the other, figuratively speaking, stomped on centuries of British dignity. The line wasn't just paint on the pavement. It was a boundary, a shield of respect separating tradition from chaos. James knew it, the crowd knew it, and even the horse, bless its noble heart, seemed ready to file an official complaint with Buckingham Palace. The crowd buzzed with murmurs and camera clicks. Phones were up, capturing every second, because why intervene when you can post a viral video instead? "All right, folks, get ready for the shot of the century," the tourist declared, holding his phone high. He angled it to perfectly frame James the horse and the imposing bearskin hat. Then, with all the grace of a reality TV villain, he slapped the edge of James's hat as if testing its authenticity. The crowd collectively gasped. Some giggled nervously. Others muttered, "Is he serious?" You could almost hear the unspoken thought, "This guy is digging his own grave." James didn't need to speak. The next sound said it all. With a deliberate, almost theatrical motion, he lowered his ceremonial rifle until its point barely kissed the ground. The metallic clang echoed across the square, slicing through the noise like a warning bell. The tourist jumped back, his bravado briefly replaced by startled confusion. The crowd froze, their collective breath held. For a moment, even the pigeons stopped flapping about. Then, just as tension reached its peak, the horse decided to join the performance. Feeling the weight of the moment, or perhaps channeling its own inner monarch, it let out a sharp snort and took a decisive step forward. Its sheer size and power sent the tourist stumbling backward, right over the white line he had so arrogantly ignored. "Did you just sick the horse on me?" he shrieked, his voice rising an octave. He sounded less like an offended adult and more like a child whose balloon had floated away. James finally broke his silence. His voice was steady, calm, and sharp as a blade. "Step back. This is your final warning." The crowd erupted. Applause rang out, mingled with shouts of approval. "Serves him right," someone yelled. Even the horse seemed to stand a little taller, as if basking in the crowd's admiration. But the tourist wasn't done. Embarrassed and cornered, he doubled down. "I'm an American. Do you know how much I spent to come here? You can't treat me like this." His voice cracked under the weight of his indignation. James turned to face him fully, his expression unchanging. "Money doesn't buy respect," he replied, his words carrying the weight of 1,000 years of British decorum. The tourist's face flushed red, his indignation melting into a mix of embarrassment and frustration. Before he could muster another retort, a young boy in the crowd piped up, his voice cutting through the tension like a dart. "Mom, he looks like an idiot." Laughter exploded around the square. The tourist's face burned brighter than a London sunset. Phones were still recording, capturing every glorious second of his humiliation. And there it was, the moment everyone in the crowd would remember. Not the splendor of Buckingham Palace, not the grandeur of the Queen's Guard, but the sight of a grown man brought to his knees, not by force, but by his own arrogance and a child's unfiltered honesty. The tourist's moment of triumph, or so he'd thought, crumbled faster than a dry biscuit in tea. Videos of his disastrous behavior were already zipping through the internet, hashtags spreading like wildfire. #RespectTheGuard, #LondonFails, and a particularly brutal one, #HorseJustice. The crowd around him had morphed from passive onlookers to an impromptu jury, their eyes judging him with a mix of disdain and amusement. Then came the voice, deep and authoritative, slicing through the murmurs. "Excuse me, sir, but your actions violate royal protocol." It was one of the palace security officers. He approached with the kind of calm that only made things more intimidating. The tourist froze, his bravado draining as fast as his social media credibility. But I didn't mean anything by it," he stammered, trying to justify the unjustifiable. "I was just, interacting with the culture." The officer's expression didn't change. "Please step aside, now." The tourist, now less of a bold entertainer and more of a sheepish nuisance, was gently escorted away from the scene. The crowd's reaction was immediate and merciless. Boos, disapproving headshakes, and a few well-placed snickers. Someone in the back yelled, "Finally!" and was met with a wave of approving laughter. James, meanwhile, returned to his post. His movements were deliberate, every gesture a statement of composure and dignity. He adjusted his bearskin hat, the very one the tourist had dared to slap, as if restoring its rightful place atop his head. His rifle was back in position, his stance as steady as stone. But before fully resuming his regal stillness, James allowed himself one small gesture. He glanced toward the young boy who had called out earlier, his lips curving ever so slightly into the faintest smile, a subtle acknowledgement of the boy's unintentional role in diffusing the tension. Then, as if granting the moment a final flourish, James winked. The crowd erupted into applause, their earlier tension melting into admiration. A few cheers rang out. "That's how it's done," and "God save the guard." Even the horse seemed to sense the shift in energy. It turned its head slightly, almost as if taking a well-deserved bow. The movement was so deliberate, so perfectly timed, that someone in the crowd whispered, "That horse deserves a medal." Somewhere in the back, a voice rose above the noise, rich with sentiment. And this is why we protect our traditions. The day carried on, as days in London do. Buses still crawled, Big Ben still chimed, and tourists still swarmed the gates. But James knew that this particular moment would live far beyond the day's end. The video of the tourist misadventure was destined to go viral, a cautionary tale of why one should never mess with the Queen's Guard. And as for the tourist, he would soon discover what it felt like to become an unwitting internet sensation for all the wrong reasons. His arrogance, his entitlement, his failed attempt to turn tradition into entertainment would serve as a reminder that respect isn't earned with a plane ticket or a wallet full of cash. Back at his post, James stood tall, his presence unshaken. Because while tourists may come and go, the Guard and the dignity it represents endures.